Joe Rogan's long-form conversations do something no mainstream media format can. Most interviews are built like cages. Tight time limits, scripted questions, rigid talking points. Politicians and celebrities can walk into those studios, deliver their rehearsed lines, and walk out untouched. But on Rogan's show, there are no cages. 3 hours. No commercial breaks, no safety net. And that's when the real cracks start to show. People let their guard down. They talk like they would at dinner with friends, not at a press conference. They forget they're being watched by millions. And in those moments, when the contradictions pile up, when the casual admissions slip through, you see who they really are. Sometimes brilliant, sometimes embarrassing, and sometimes compromised. Let's start with Lex Fridman. If you've spent even 5 minutes in the podcast world, you know his look. Black suit, blank expression. The soft monotone voice that makes every conversation feel like a late-night philosophy class. He markets himself as the neutral intellectual, someone above politics, just a seeker of truth. But look closer and you notice something strange. He isn't just asking questions, he's trying to play the protagonist in world events. And nowhere is this clearer than when he talks about Ukraine and Russia. On Rogan's podcast, Lex casually mentioned he wanted to interview Vladimir Putin. Not a journalist, not a world leader, a podcaster. Joe immediately cut to the obvious. Why you? Lex didn't answer the how. He didn't explain why world leaders would suddenly open doors for a researcher with no background in politics or diplomacy. Instead, he gave a speech about mission. His exact words, "My goal is to push for peace, to do my small part in pushing for peace." This wasn't just a podcast anymore. Lex was talking like he was personally appointed by the United Nations. And yet, weeks after interviewing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he suddenly turned on him, publicly criticizing Zelensky's choice of words about Putin in the middle of a war. As if Lex himself was the referee of morality in global conflict. This is where the cracks appear. Because the story of Lex Fridman isn't about a neutral intellectual. It's about someone who carefully manufactured access and influence. Let's start with the credentials. He's always introduced as Lex Fridman, research scientist at MIT. But the truth is more complicated. His PhD is from Drexel University, not MIT. His MIT role is a non-faculty research position, essentially a contract job, and as of 2024 he doesn't even live near MIT. He lives in Austin, Texas, rarely appears on campus, yet still uses the MIT brand to present himself as an elite academic voice. So how did this guy, this part-time researcher, suddenly start landing interviews with Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, and world leaders? The turning point came in 2019. Lex published a Tesla autopilot study claiming the technology actually kept drivers more alert. That conclusion contradicted nearly every other legitimate study, which warned Tesla's system lulled drivers into dangerous complacency. Experts shredded his paper as methodologically flawed. MIT was so embarrassed they quietly scrubbed it from their site. But the paper served its real purpose. Networking. It got Lex noticed by Elon Musk. Tesla flew him out. Soon, Lex was interviewing Musk, and overnight, his small AI podcast turned into a global platform. From there, Lex wrapped his brand in one theme: love and peace. His words again, "I'm just a silly kid trying to do a bit of good in this world." He started speaking like a hopeless romantic philosopher, even while casually defending historical figures like Genghis Khan. On Rogan's show, Lex said Genghis was progressive because he elevated women into positions of power. Joe Rogan pushed back. Lex doubled down. Joe said bluntly, he did a lot of raping. Lex answered with, nope. And then, when called out, he retreated. I'm regretting defending Genghis for fun. That pattern, throwing out reckless statements, then hiding behind fun or intellectual curiosity, is what critics have noticed again and again. Bloomberg reported tech CEOs prefer Lex's podcast because it's friendlier than journalism. The Verge called him a softball interviewer. The Atlantic said he doesn't even pretend to be detached. And there's another strange habit. At the end of his podcasts, Lex often breaks from the guest, turns directly to the camera, and delivers a mini-lecture to the audience. It's always framed as profound wisdom, but what it really does is steal the final spotlight. No guest leaves with the last word. Lex does. The more you watch, the more it feels less like truth-seeking and more like self-mythologizing. That's why some wonder if Lex's persona is just a performance. Others question whether his improbable access suggests deeper ties. Intelligence connections? Maybe. Or maybe it's just pure ego. Either way, the result is the same. A platform that makes the powerful feel safe, never accountable. And then there was the infamous guitar moment. Lex sat across from Joe Rogan, pulled out a guitar, and sang him a tribute song. A song about Joe's shoulders and snakes for arms. You could see Joe cringe in real time. For one of the world's biggest podcasters, it was humiliating. For Rogan, it was confirmation. The mask had slipped. Lex wasn't just compromised by ego, he was consumed by it. If Lex Fridman represents ego, Mike Baker represents something far more calculated. He's one of Joe Rogan's most frequent guests with more than 20 appearances over a decade. His resume? 17 years as a covert CIA officer. Which raises the obvious question. Why does a so-called retired spy keep showing up on the world's most powerful podcast? There's a saying, there's no such thing as a retired CIA agent. Baker proves it. On Rogan, he admitted he still goes into CIA headquarters. He said he's working on projects with them, including a TV show about a museum inside the agency. His words, "We have a really nice relationship. They trust me." Does that sound like retirement? Baker's technique is subtle. He engages in what's called a limited hangout, a tactic first exposed during Watergate. The strategy is simple. Reveal a partial truth to gain credibility, while hiding the more damaging secrets. On Rogan, Baker admitted, "Of course we steal secrets. That's the point of the exercise." A truth. But when asked about the deep state, the idea of intelligence agencies acting outside democratic oversight, he downplayed it. Never say never, he said, but insisted in his experience the CIA was apolitical. He validated the concern while neutralizing it. And then there are the slips. On his very first Rogan appearance, Baker explained how the CIA develops assets. Then casually added, "Maybe at the end of an operation we terminate them, but that's a different story. Forget I said that. Terminate." The word hung in the air. Did he mean end the relationship? Or end the person? He immediately tried to walk it back, but the damage was done. It revealed how close he was skirting the line of what he shouldn't say. When Rogan brought up Edward Snowden, Baker's irritation was immediate. He compared Snowden to Robert Hanssen, the FBI agent who spied for the Soviets for 22 years. He dismissed Snowden's whistleblowing as self-importance, and he didn't stop there. He attacked Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who published Snowden's documents. Again, the CIA playbook: discredit the messenger, avoid the message. But Baker isn't just talking. He's also running Portman Square Group, a private intelligence firm staffed by ex-NSA and CIA officials, which means he isn't just a former agent, he's still profiting from intelligence work. And that makes his role on Rogan even clearer. He isn't just a guest, he's an ambassador. Someone who makes black operations sound like mild bureaucracy. Someone who takes the sharp edges of the CIA and wraps them in dad jokes and casual conversation. Someone who normalizes the extraordinary. That's why the audience started mocking him. Mike Baker drinking game. Take a shot every time he says, "I can't talk about that. You'll be sober all night." Or, CIA training must include advanced techniques for talking without communicating. But the joke hides something serious. Baker isn't just compromised. He's the one doing the compromising. If Mike Baker is the CIA guy who admits a little to hide a lot, Lou Elizondo is the UFO guy who admits everything but shows nothing. Lou appeared on Joe Rogan as the supposed Pentagon insider who once ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, the government's classified UFO project. He dropped bombshell statements with a straight face. There is very compelling evidence to suggest the US government is in possession of exotic material not made by humans. That's the kind of statement that should shake the world. But then came the problem. Every time Rogan pressed for details, footage, documentation, photos, Lou would backtrack. "I can't talk about that. I haven't been given permission. I can only say what I've been authorized to say." Think about that for a second. Here's a man claiming the Pentagon is hiding alien technology, sitting in front of the world's most watched podcaster, and all he can do is say, "Trust me." And when journalists investigated, the cracks deepened. Pentagon officials told the New York Times and other outlets that Lou never actually led the program he claimed. He exaggerated his role. And his track record since leaving the government has been riddled with embarrassments. In 2018, Liu displayed real UFO photos supposedly swarming over the U.S. Capitol. They turned out to be CGI stills from a science fiction film and a panel from a 1954 comic book. In 2024, he presented an aerial image he claimed was a mothership. Investigators quickly found it on Google Maps. It was an irrigation circle. Even worse, in another photo, the mothership hovering over an embassy was just the reflection of a chandelier, with the photographer's own hairline visible in the glass. So why does someone with this track record end up on Rogan's stage? The answer might be simpler than government cover-ups: self-promotion. Liu has books to sell, best conferences to headline, tours to run. He doesn't need to prove anything conclusively. He just needs to keep the mystery alive. On Rogan, though, something else happened. Joe asked the obvious. Why is the Pentagon letting you say aliens exist, but not letting you give any details? Why tease us like this? Liu's response? There are factions inside the Pentagon that don't want this revealed. Some people will be very upset with me for doing this show. It sounds dramatic, it sounds like a spy thriller. But the reality is more mundane. The Pentagon already publicly confirmed and declassified some UFO footage in 2020. Liu wasn't breaking news. He was recycling headlines and wrapping them in secrecy. So what do you call that? Compromised by intelligence ties? Or compromised by the lure of fame? Either way, what millions of Rogan listeners got wasn't disclosure. It was performance. Now, if Liu Elizondo represents the grifter who leans on classified information, Annie Jacobsen represents something more tragic. What happens when a serious journalist goes too far down the rabbit hole? Jacobsen is a respected author. She's written extensively about secret government projects and military technology. But on Rogan, she unleashed a theory about the Roswell UFO crash that left even Joe looking like he didn't know whether to laugh or call for help. According to Jacobsen, the 1947 crash in Roswell wasn't aliens at all. It was Stalin. Her claim: Stalin deliberately crashed a Soviet craft into U.S. territory designed to mimic a UFO. But here's the horrifying twist. According to Jacobsen's source, the beings recovered from the crash weren't aliens. They were human children surgically altered to look like aliens. Joe, visibly stunned, asked if she had photos, documents, anything. She admitted she didn't. All she had was the word of one anonymous source, who conveniently died before she could reveal his name. And it got darker. Jacobsen claimed the U.S. tried to replicate the Soviet program. Joe pressed, who did they experiment on? Her answer: handicapped children, surgically altered, mutilated to resemble extraterrestrials, and then killed. The problem here isn't just the lack of evidence, it's that her entire claim rests on one dead man's unverified story. No photos, no documents, no corroboration. Just a sensational tale that shifts history into horror without a shred of proof. As Joe listened, his expressions said it all. He wasn't buying it. But he let her talk, because that's what his format does. He lets the rope run long enough to see whether the guest hangs themselves. For Jacobsen, that's exactly what happened. A once respected investigative writer exposed herself as compromised, not by government secrets, but by her own imagination. The most revealing Rogan conversations, though, often aren't with UFO enthusiasts or media personalities. They're with politicians. And none was more eye-opening than Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Crenshaw built his brand as a straight-talking Navy SEAL turned conservative warrior. Tough on national security, tough on the left. A guy who positioned himself as a man of principle. But then he came on Rogan and revealed a philosophy that made even his own supporters furious. The topic was pandemic relief. Crenshaw argued stimulus checks were dangerous. His words: there's value in suffering. In today's society, we've convinced ourselves there's no value in suffering. That the role of government is to end your suffering, that's a false promise. He doubled down: we need to get away from this victimhood mentality. In other words, struggling families needed hardship to build character. But behind the scenes, Dan wasn't exactly living by those values. In March 2020, just as Congress was drafting the first COVID relief package, Crenshaw made 5 stock trades: Southwest Airlines, Boeing, Amazon, and S&P Index Fund, days before the CARES Act was passed, the same bill that handed airlines a $50 billion bailout. Dan failed to disclose those trades within the legally required 45-day window. He only revealed them months later, conveniently after his re-election. Before March 2020, he had never once traded individual stocks in office, but suddenly, right when billions were on the table, he did. So when Dan said struggling Americans needed to suffer, he was speaking from a very different position. Because his suffering came with stock options. And his donor list makes the picture clearer. Huntsman Corp and Cheniere Energy, both connected to BlackRock, were among his largest funders. In fact, BlackRock itself had named Crenshaw a young global leader at the World Economic Forum in 2019. The same UEF his own voter base often criticizes as an elite, globalist institution. So which is it? A man of the people or a man of BlackRock and insider trades? The hypocrisy was clear. For ordinary families, stimulus checks were dangerous dependency. For corporations, bailouts were necessary. For himself, trades were just smart investing. That's not principle. That's being compromised by money and power. When you step back, a pattern emerges. Rogan's podcast is unique not because of its questions, but because of its silence. The space, the time, the comfort. It's that breathing room that lets people reveal who they are, sometimes without realizing it. Lex Fridman revealed the ego behind his neutral persona. Mike Baker revealed the CIA never really lets you go. Lou Elizondo revealed the emptiness of UFO theater. Annie Jacobsen revealed the danger of unchecked imagination. Dan Crenshaw revealed the hypocrisy of political elites. Each of them thought Rogan's stage was a place to control their image. But the longer the conversation went, the more the image cracked. Because the Joe Rogan experience doesn't just show you people, it shows you who they become when the performance wears off. And in those moments, you see it clearly. They're compromised by ego, by money, by secrecy, by imagination, by power. And once it's out there, once the podcast is published, there's no taking it back. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't just scroll away. Hit like so more people see how these narratives unfold in real time. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the guests, the stories, and the power games that shape what we're told. And after this, check out my other videos where we uncover even more hidden contradictions in public figures. Because in a world of curated sound bites and polished press releases, the long conversation is the last place where the truth still leaks through.